What's that, Buddha? Oh, we didn't introduce you in the first show? Oh, I'm sorry. Buddha, we are going to introduce you first in this show. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is Dave. Oh. Tonight's host is Buddha, co-host David Stevenson, and guest Gene Hislop. And we're going to talk a little bit more about immigration. We're going to bring it back home to Danbury. But first, where did you want to start with this show?
Well, I think it's our last show focused a lot on the national climate with immigration, about hate groups that are driving the anti-immigrant propaganda. This show we could kind of really focus on what's happening, or rather not happening currently locally. You know, since the 287G, which we discussed that in its relation to the bill in Arizona, how there are some similarities with the fear of racial profiling, no clear definition for the police to follow. It's interesting that we had mentioned that because as of yet, from what I have been able to gather and in the mayor's own words, there have not been agents trained yet to actually enforce 287G. At the time that the 287G was being proposed, a lot of us had theorized that it was a political maneuver, which also goes back to me saying that one of the big motivators of this anti-immigrant hysteria that we've been hearing has always been politics.
So it was a plan without a plan?
Quite possibly. I mean, it could very well be that the economy impacted their ability to actually enact and to train officers for this. They might not have the funds to actually send the officers for training, but it was also very convenient political timing. The other thing is about the economy, activists like myself and others who really stridently opposed the 287G ICE access, we had asked for a cost analysis time and time again of what this was going to cost the average taxpayer in Danbury. We thought that was a very important thing for them to know, is that if you were going to vote, you know, or lobby your candidate rather to support this, you know, proposition, you should know what you're going to be spending on it.
I was under the impression that it was federally funded. There was no cost to the Danbury taxpayer.
No, that is not true. There was always going to be, you know, definitely extra costs that Danbury was going to have to fund. Certain things would have been covered by the feds, and certain things would have been covered by
In other words,
local.
we would pay as taxpayers not through local taxes, but through federal taxes.
And state.
And state taxes, okay. So we're paying for it, but just in a different way.
Right. Well, you know, whatever taxes actually pay for our police services, you know, would then have to go towards their training these officers, which would include things like their transportations, their hotel stays, their meals. And we weren't ever able to get an analysis of what other responsibilities would be the local municipalities versus what fiscal responsibilities would belong to the federal government. So now we're seeing that the city didn't have the money to do that, you know, possibly, or that it was just a political maneuver because it's not been enacted. Not that I, for a million years, want it to be, but it does question why it was brought up. You know, we also talked about my fear that this kind of law, you know, the one that was drafted in Arizona, could be brought to Connecticut should Mayor Boughton reach the highest office, you know, or
the
second highest office in the state. The fact is that the same person who drafted Arizona's law, SB 1070, which of course allows you know, police officers to stop people and ask them for papers based on what they call reasonable suspicion, which has not been defined. Russell Pierce, who drafted the bill, supposedly, actually FAIR has admitted to drafting the bill. Russell Pierce also proposes.
Are they extolling what they've done in a bragging kind of a way, or is it what kind of tack are they using in
oh, they're claiming full responsibility for it,
so
and you know they're admitting it
with pride.
Yeah, with pride. You know, quite well. You know, and what's scary is that other bills that are really horrible for immigrants have been proposed. Russell Pierce is actually trying to work on a bill right now, and this sounds incredulous, but it is actually true. He has proposed it. It's not, the final draft has not been submitted or anything, but it is an idea they're batting around of saying that you don't get automatic citizenship by birth anymore. They want to deny people the right to have automatic citizenship at birth.
So that perhaps if you were here, born in the United States by dint of being the child of someone born somewhere else,
an undocumented immigrant, that you would not
automatically have the rights of an American citizen. Now, the Arizona law, this has been described as being one of the classic cases of states' rights versus federal rights, where the state has passed a law and the federal government is reviewing whether that law overrides the constitutionality of the federal government having power over state governments ultimately. Now, it sounds like what's going on in Danbury is kind of the opposite. Is it the federal government stepping in with the ICE program, overriding the local powers of the city?
No, actually, ICE was invited into Danbury by our mayor. You have to realize that Mayor Boughton was a founding member of this organization called Mayors and Executives for Immigration Reform, and has been going to Brazil to talk about immigration problems, has been, in touch with senators and mayors and executives from across the United States to really hash out immigration and to, basically, in my opinion, kind of form a nationwide front amongst mayors and executives, and obviously that's not possible because we have plenty of mayors who really know what's going on with immigration, who support it. But Mayor Boughton, on the other hand, basically invited ICE in by, I shouldn't say Mayor Boughton alone, obviously the Common Council had to do it, but our local anti-immigrant group, CTCIC and USC File, they actually petitioned our Common Council to, at least their candidates on Common Council, to bring this to the attention of the Common Council as a whole and vote whether or not to join in this program with ICE.
I'd like to have Mayor Boughton on to give us his take on this, and hopefully we will one day. But what do you think his stake in this is? What's in it for him personally?
I think that Mayor Boughton's voting demographic is largely Republican, obviously, and largely older generation, and unfortunately, historically, we're seeing that those are the more likely to be opposed to immigration groups. So it's obviously he's catering to his constituents. Yeah. Absolutely. The interesting thing is that there was a talk show here on Comcast that I watched where Mayor Boughton was speaking. And they asked him if he became the governor, because at that time he was running for governor, whether or not he would try to create 287G ICE access for the entire state. And he paused for a moment and said, no, I wouldn't. Now, there's somebody who's probably going to watch this show who will laugh when I say this, but she always calls me a very keen judge of body language. The fact that he paused before answering, and it was quite a long, visible pause, and kind of his body language when he did it, he was not really looking directly towards the camera. It just seemed to me as if he was hesitant to answer that. And the reason why, in my belief, is I think that if he thought that it was valuable to his campaign, I think that if he thought that that was something that the whole state of Connecticut would support, that he would absolutely pass it. The thing is, obviously, I don't think the entire state of Connecticut would want that. Obviously, New Haven, Hartford, they definitely would not go for that.
Or more urban areas certainly would not generally be in favor of something of that magnitude, certainly, and maybe even of that nature.
Right. So that begs the question, if he was so hesitant, people are probably imagining, why can't we take him at his word? If he said no, he means no. Well, the fact is that our mayor has not always been honest, especially when it comes to issues of immigration. You know, not only has he really kind of been hand in hand with a lot of the anti-immigrant groups, and who are, of course, getting their information from these sources that I had mentioned in the earlier show, but also when it comes to the Danbury 11 case, currently it's coming up into the news again. I mean, it's been years now since 11 day laborers were taken from Kennedy Park and handed over immediately to ICE with no proof that they were undocumented whatsoever, except that they were Latino and waiting on a corner for work. That's called racial profiling.
You're right. It really has found its way out of the public eye.
It has. But what's interesting is they have not gone away. There are a couple who have returned to their own country voluntarily, but there is still a major lawsuit going on. And what's interesting is that Mayor Boughton was ordered by the Superior Court, his judge, that he must be deposed. He tried to fight being deposed originally, and he has been deposed. Now the battle that we face, immigrants' rights activists, is we want that to be made public. Recently, it came to light that he had actually offered a large settlement to the remaining members of the Danbury 11.
Yeah, where would that settlement actually come from? Would it come from the judges themselves? Would it come with the city attorneys and the mayor in conjunction with judges? Who actually makes the determination about what kind of settlement to offer?
I assume,
in a case that's iffy for the city in terms of winning or losing. I
assume it would have been his attorneys who advised him you should settle if at all possible.
Yeah.
Just to make this go away, if for no other reason than it's a headache. For whatever reason, he was advised to make a settlement, and the lawyer drafted what that settlement should be, what they thought was a fair offering, and I don't know what the dollar amount was to the remaining members of the Danbury 11.
Yeah.
Which means that the people who already went back basically get nothing if that happens. These wonderful men have fought for years now for the truth to come out. It's interesting that Boughton actually proposed a settlement before his deposition was made public. Now he's going to be deposed, and we need to make sure that that deposition is made public. What the deposition will tell us is right after the arrest of the Danbury 11, originally Mayor Boughton was saying, I knew nothing about this. This was the federal immigration agents. I did not authorize this. I knew nothing about it. Certainly they're within their rights, but this is not an act the city took. Don't be mad at me.
Let's play act this out. You're going to depose me, Mark Boughton here. Nice to meet you.
Oh gosh.
You depose me. I'm Mark Boughton. What questions would you ask Mark Boughton? What do you think would be reasonable, just, and fair questions to ask Mayor Boughton?
Did you at any point prior to the Danbury 11, the day that the Danbury 11 were arrested, did you at any point make any kind of communication asking Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to come and either intimidate or arrest day laborers in the city of Danbury?
That's an interesting question. Next question? Next question.
That might be the way it goes. All right. Did at any point you have prior knowledge, did they alert you at any point that they were coming to perform this raid?
Oh, you wanted an answer to that. Next question.
Did your officers, the officers of the city of Danbury, participate in any way with the raid of the Danbury 11?
I'm going to have to consult with my attorney here for a second.
Yes. This could very well be the way that it is. I hope we get more information on that. I believe that we will get more information on that. In fact, it did come out, after the fact that Danbury officers were actually involved in the raid. So he actually contradicted himself, and now we want it in the deposition. We want it public. We want absolute certainty. What we want is to know not only were Danbury officers involved in the raid, but also that they had prior knowledge of the raid, and hopefully who instigated it.
Now, when there's a raid or a sting operation, if you will, how close generally is the administration of a city involved with the police department in coordinating a sting operation.
Are you talking about the city involved with the police, or is the police involved with Immigration Customs Enforcement?
The city and the police. Does the mayors generally get involved?
I would assume, you know, if it were a sting operation for drugs or something, I would assume that the police would have to notify the mayor. He is their chief executive officer in that case. If there is an issue where it could post a public safety concern, that there could be a hostage crisis, that there could be, it's a public relations issue. Any kind of, if it were in that case where it were a drug scenario, it's a public safety issue, and the mayor would probably be notified. As for immigration, obviously, up until recently, that has always been the responsibility of the federal government. So to what extent they coordinate with local police and local administration is really the question. And what we were seeing in a lot of raids that were happening, not necessarily in Danbury, luckily we've really only suffered a few very high-level profile raids over history, or at least one, which was the Danbury 11. What we saw in other areas, though, like Riverside, New Jersey, and certain places in Massachusetts, were that the local police were completely kept out of the bargain. Not that they didn't know, not that they weren't allowed to be there, but that federal government's authority trumped their authority. Local police were actually saying, don't do this, don't go into that apartment, this victim hasn't lived here for 5 years, I mean this immigrant hasn't lived in this building for 5 years, we know the people who live here now, and ICE was going in and kicking down the doors anyway and, you know, ripping out whoever's in the buildings. So they weren't listening or cooperating with local authority at all.
I'm going to put this in a more human context and ask you the question, is Immigration and Customs Enforcement the folks that come in with the helmets and the battering rams? And I'm thinking specifically about a case in Miami, a situation in Miami with a young man named Elian Gonzalez. Was that Immigration and Customs Enforcement?
It was called something else at the time. It was INS, but yes.
Immigration Naturalization Services. Is that essentially the same thing?
It is, except that since it has become ICE, it's also involving FBI, CIA. It's like they're all coming together in this, you know, unit under Homeland Security. So now that Homeland Security has become such an umbrella, ICE is obviously a lot more militaristic. It is a lot more organized, and their authority extends further than INS's.
That's got to be cause for some concern, I would think, to folks across the political spectrum that are concerned about government having overriding authority in more areas, particularly in a military sense, where they can do a lot more severe activities and not having checks and balances on them. I'm reaching out to my libertarian friends and that have been on the show and ask them that question. Where are you on this issue? Is it about is your focus on getting folks out of the country that are not here legally, or is it on looking at what types of behavior we allow our law enforcement and government officials to engage in?
David, that's a good question. Now, of course, I don't know a lot of the historical stances that the libertarian movement has taken on certain issues. But how do they feel about the secret prisons that are in Guantanamo, and you know, obviously about the maintenance of those prisons? Do they tend to be in objection of those prisons like Guantanamo and such?
I think they a lot of them are ambivalent on a lot of these issues. It's a lot to fathom. It's a lot to fathom for all of us to look at these very complex issues and try to arrive at a clear understanding of what is happening and how we feel about it.
Well, the reason why is because, you know, obviously I've been on your show previously, and you had been questioning me about the privatization of immigrant prisons, of detention centers, and obviously that is very similar to things that are going on in Guantanamo. You know, just so you know, not only is Russell Pierce trying to actually, you know, say that American citizens are not citizens at birth, he's also proposing that any person found here in violation of their visa, which could mean overstaying a visa, would have a mandatory 6-year sentence in jail.
Wow.
Now, in Arizona, what that means is they get to stay in one of Sheriff Arpaio's prisons.
Give us a little background, because I know he's become kind of a pariah, kind of a bugaboo of folks on our side of the equation, folks that would like immigrants to be treated with the respect that future American citizens, and they are citizens in training, in fact. Some of the things that have gone on with Sheriff Arpaio and...
Sheriff Arpaio has actually forced Latino men, immigrants, undocumented, to march around in an open yard in Arizona heat and sunshine in pink underwear. He has actually engaged in torture methods, and this is very well documented, you know, water torture and such on undocumented immigrants. He forces them to stay in tents. In the Arizona heat, they don't even stay in cells. They stay in these green tents. There are photographs that you can see online that show these tents that immigrants are forced to live in the middle of this cement brick yard in green tents under the sun. This is how they are forced to live. Is this a crime that really requires that kind of treatment?
I don't know what's to be gained from that kind of treatment to begin with, but
if that, I mean, if you imagine how we were treating the inmates in Guantanamo, which is abysmal, and people had a huge uproar about how these people were being treated in Guantanamo. These human beings were being tortured, they were being starved, they were being harassed and abused. If we had such a national uproar over that, why don't we have a similar uproar about Sheriff Arpaio and the conditions of some of these detention centers? It was just released this past week again. There are so many wonderful articles that people need to read, disturbing articles, but very important articles that have been released in this last week. T. John Hutto Detention Center, which is infamous for human rights abuses, infamous, was warned when the Obama administration took office and Napolitano became the head of Homeland Security, were warned that they had to reorganize the entire detention center or it would be closed down because of the abuses that were suffered. A report was just released this week. 6 or 7 inmates, female inmates, had been sexually assaulted by guards, you know, ranging from grabbing to, you know, 6 or 7 inmates, female inmates, had been sexually assaulted by guards. These are not conditions that we want these people to be kept in. They are not enemies of the state in the same sense that, you know, a terrorist plotter would be. I mean, these are not, you don't treat them like garbage. They are human beings.
Well, there's an old saying about a society being judged by the way it treats its least powerful individuals. That's right. And that's not just commonsensical. That's also, you know, being a Christian. That falls under my purview and my faith. That it just doesn't. You just try to do the right thing, and when you don't, it really is. It's difficult.
This is going to leave massive scars, I believe, on our national conscience for years. Americans, we tend to see things in hindsight a lot differently than when we're in the thick of it. If you think about the civil rights, if you think about you know, slavery, if you think about what we did to the Native Americans, in hindsight, we see these things and we suffer scars on our consciousness, on our view of what our nation stands for, and that's what's going to happen to this time in history too. And unfortunately, the mayors and the executives and the anti-immigrant shock jocks and the anti-immigrant organizations and all of these people who are out there screaming for the heads of immigrants, their descendants are going to read about this and feel shame. And there's no way you cannot feel shame when women are sexually assaulted in one of our prisons. There is no way you cannot feel shame when somebody like Sheriff Arpaio can force human beings to march around in an open yard under Arizona heat, noonday heat, in pink underwear and nothing else. There is no way. That is atrocious.
Well, I'm a little bit heartened by the fact that the Justice Department has been at odds with him since the Obama administration
In the past.
was voted in.
In the past.
Is that trend continuing or no?
What we're seeing is that a lot... I think that we can all agree that not just on immigration, but on many, many topics, we had a lot more hopes for the Obama administration that have currently been done. The reasons why, some of it's understandable, you know, the man can only do so much. We have all those reasons. But obviously there are things we want to see done that were not done.
Yeah.
Immigration overhaul has not even been touched.
It's a hot potato, it seems like.
It is an extremely hot potato. But in the meantime, it's human lives that hang in the balance. These Danbury 11 surviving members spent time in detention centers. You know, they were sent to El Paso. They lived in similar conditions. They suffered. Why? Why? We did not even know at the time that they were arrested whether or not they had papers on them. And is that, again, worthy of the kind of abuse that goes on in these detention centers? And it's not isolated. It's systemic. Janet Napolitano has even said it is systemic. If we know that it is systemic, if the UN has been turned away from our own detention centers and not allowed to inspect them, why is nothing being done?
That's not really who we are as Americans, I don't think, and I think that there's always hope. 1 minute left. There's always hope that will leave us with a good thought about what we can do to head us back in the right direction, Jean.
Well, first of all, write to Arizona State Legislature and say that you absolutely abhor this law. Secondly, boycott Arizona. If you have travel plans, don't go. Thirdly, stand up to your local congressman, write letters, be visible, and say, don't ever pass these laws in Connecticut. Write to Mayor Boughton and say, do not engage in 287 or any similar legislation.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. And we've had Jean Hislop on talking about immigration. I'm David Stevenson, and we've been under the auspices of Buddha. Thank you very much, and good evening. This has been Progressive Soup.